Welcome to the I Am Not Alone podcast, Carolina.
Hi.
So you have a very unique story. You became a mom at the age of 14.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So when I was 14, I met someone who was a few years older than I was, and really kind of fell in love completely. I thought that was the person that I was meant to be with for life. And the relationship really escalated quickly. I never had a boyfriend. I don't think I'd ever even really kissed a guy before that. But he had a very different idea of what sort of a relationship would look like between a guy and a girl, being older, having been exposed to a lot more things than I ever was. And so the relationship quickly escalated to become, a very sexualized relationship. And I ended up pregnant and found out I was pregnant just after he had left the country. He had left, being in his older teens. He had been sent away to live with someone else. And I found out I was pregnant. I was alone. The whole time my parents didn't know about the relationship because I was under the impression, that I couldn't talk to my parents about what was going on. I was really scared. He really convinced me that this was something that we couldn't really tell anyone about. And that I felt like my parents would never agree to me dating at all, like not having a boyfriend yet because I was too young. So I kind of went along with them and didn't say anything about what was going on. So I ended up at the doctor's office. My mom sent me, she kind of had an idea of what was going on by that point, and she sent me for, like a general checkup with an aunt, one of my brother's sisters that's always been, kind of like, you have that aunt that's like your favorite aunt. So she went along with me. And sure enough, confirmed I was pregnant. And then I had to have that conversation with my parents, which was probably the hardest conversation I've ever had with them. I was about to start grade 9. Okay. That was the summer. I hadn't even started high school.
You seemed so young at the time, though.
I was very young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think the level of maturity I had even at that age was probably not typical.
Okay.
We had been through a lot already as a family. We'd come here from a war-torn country. I had lost a little brother early on, just before we left the country. So when I was about 8.
What country is that?
El Salvador.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, I really had a deep sense of I really wanted the best for my son. I understood, and I think at 14 you're old enough to understand that this was a life and that I was now responsible for it. I just fully didn't understand the scope of what that meant, just because of life experience, right? I don't
think anybody has an understanding of what it means at any age, actually.
I've kind of come to that conclusion over the years.
Yeah, I seriously always tell people you'll never be ready to be a parent, actually. It changes you, definitely. But 14 is particularly young. Can I ask you did you share with your aunt beforehand what was going on?
Yeah.
On the way to the doctor, you told her you had
on the way home. So after, so she left me at the doctor's, went to go run errands, and then when she came back, I already had an ultrasound in my hand. Oh. So I remember her.
So you were in the doctor's office alone?
Yeah. And I remember her just putting her arms around my shoulder and saying, like, you feel right now like the world's over, but it's really not. I know you feel right now like somebody took your world and shook it upside down, but it's really not. You have to let a little bit of time go by and you'll see like everything will kind of sink into place. And then she kind of tried to reassure me, like, your parents are going to be really upset. Yes. They're going to need time to kind of process this, and then we'll figure this out as a family.
Well, it sounds like your aunt's a really wise woman.
Oh, she's really amazing, yeah.
So then did you go home and tell your parents right away?
Yeah. If I remember correctly, she went home and she talked to them first.
Okay.
And then I came back. I came home and kind of sat at the table with them.
Huh.
So, I mean, I told them, right?
But they already knew.
But they already knew, yeah.
Right, and what happened?
They kind of did. I mean, my parents have this dynamic where I know she tells them everything, but, you know, it was like I had to retell them. So then my dad was really, I remember my dad being particularly upset, both of them crying. And just kind of saying, well, we need some time to think about this, think about what we're going to do. They weren't ready to consider at all me parenting my child. So they really were pushing for an adoption. And I was able to meet with a young woman that had just given up her child for adoption, and really was kind of grappling with it. She felt like she didn't regret it in that she knew that that was the best thing for her child, but she did regret it in that she was really missing being a part of her child's life. So she was a young woman that was, I think, like in her late teens, early 20s. And she shared her story with me about how she was really living a bad lifestyle, partying and all sorts of things, and realized she was pregnant and she wasn't ready to really take care of her child, not in a position to take care of her child. So she decided that adoption was the best thing for her. And then a year and a half down the road was just feeling that sorrow of what she missed out on, but still feeling like that was the best thing. So
there's a mourning process to adoption as well.
Yeah.
There's a grieving, there's a loss, that's involved. But with any choice relating to a pregnancy, there's no one easy answer.
Sure.
Right? An adoption has the beauty of coming up with a plan that is contemplated with love.
Sure.
But it has the sorrow of separation. Parenting is obviously the joy of being able to pour into this little person, but yet there are challenges that are associated with this, certainly at 14 years of age. And abortion, oftentimes people think, well, that's the easy way out. But from our experience, many individuals will struggle afterwards over the long term.
So tell me about and if it's okay to ask this, tell me about some of the feelings. And a lot of times what comes up with the mothers on this show is the feelings of guilt and shame at telling family and friends. And there's like this, there's a difference between the expectation on the woman and the man in the situation where the woman seems to be carrying this sort of, shame. Is that the emotion you felt when you walked into your parents? Like you've let them down?
Yeah. So I definitely felt a lot of shame, guilt, sorrow, just to see that I had let them down. I also I continued to feel a deep loyalty or allegiance to the guy that I was with for a long time. And I think that's a part of, as an adult, I've had to now grapple with the nuances of abuse that there was in our relationship, right? There was an element to it of psychological abuse to some extent, where he was older. Sure. I really kind of, did whatever he said, and then allowed him to isolate me from the support of my family.
It's a story. That's a typical story.
I think it happens a lot to teen girls. More than we think.
Yeah, our society talks a lot about sex, but I think nobody has any real conversations about it. I mean, even in about the emotions involved in it. It's like technical conversations, as rather than the emotions people feel when they're engaging in this kind of activity. I feel like that is more important to unpack with young people, that, hey, guess what? Your body is built in a certain way that if you do certain things, you'll begin to feel strong attachments to other people. Yeah. That maybe you don't want to feel attached to.
So I remember going to the library and picking up a book that talked about your different kind of choices in a pregnancy. And so I remember you had abortion, parenting, adoption. And something that was there that really kind of struck me was time keeps going by, right? Like you're pregnant, it's 9 months, you need to make a decision. And not making a decision is a decision in itself. So you really need to kind of think things through and decide what you're going to do.
But sometimes not making a decision is the right decision too, in lots of areas of life. Like
yeah.
taking that's a time phase where you're thinking
Yeah.
about the problem too,
Yeah.
right?
I think that that's a really important point, because when I meet with individuals that have had past abortions, we think about a Janice, for example.
Right.
Oftentimes, individuals will say, I made a decision before thinking about my options. I felt pressured because of time. I rushed.
Yeah.
I
felt
only
alone.
felt alone. I only wished I would have taken the time, got more information, made sure that the decision I was making was consistent with those long-term,
Yeah.
goals and their values.
Yeah, and alternatively, I think a lot of young women that I met over the years just decided to carry out their pregnancies because, for them, abortion wasn't an option, which is great. They acknowledged it's a life. They wanted to keep their child, but then never really made a plan for parenting either. And so the child just kind of grows on their own, right? And there's no one really taking care of them. Or it's like, I even though I was so young, like I started to kind of observe the people around me and realize like some people, some teen moms, some young moms, and even some older moms, 30s, 40s, that their child is like a pet project for them, right? Like, oh, you're so cute, like playing doll, but not really nurturing their child, not really thinking through what they want to pour into their child. And so even though I was so young, I don't even know how, maybe because I'm very analytical, observant. I don't know. I thought, I really want to pour into my child. I really do want to keep my child. I began to kind of develop a deep conviction going through those counseling sessions of considering adoption. Part of that is seeing, okay, if you wanted to parent, what would be your parenting plan? So looking at even from practical things like a budget, what you want to do with your education, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? And that's something that I think anyone at 14 hasn't thought about, but probably should, right? Like that's probably a good thing to do with a 14, 15-year-old,
I
13-year-old.
agree. I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more.
So that whole soul refining process brought me to a point where I really developed a deep conviction of, I love the idea of adoption. I think it might be a great thing for some people, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't where my heart was.
And
so this leads into a question that I have right in my head right here. It's like, when did you go from being a child that your parents were going to tell what to do to being taken seriously as the mother of this child? Like I sense there's like a process. You've been telling me, my parents were they weren't taking your ability to make the decision here serious in the beginning, and there was like a change over time. How did you articulate that to them, or how did it come out that, I want to be taken serious in this decision too? It seems like they were going to tell you what to do.
Yeah, and I think there's a spectrum to that.
Okay.
So we kind of, I would probably say we maybe closed that gap like last year. But no, in terms of my decision to parent my child, that it was in that process. So when I said I want to keep him, and really express that conviction of I want to be the one to raise my child, not you guys. Like I want to be his mother, and I fully understand then that I would be responsible. And they said, well, we need to think about it. I think it was during those weeks that then I went to live with my aunt for those couple weeks. I think maybe it was like 3 weeks. It was a few weeks. And it was during those weeks that maybe they had that wrestling in their mind. I would be even interested to ask them now. Like, I don't know if they went to some sort of counseling them, right?
I believe that separation is very important sometimes in families when there's crisis. Like sometimes going to live with an aunt for 2-3 weeks, a month or something like that, giving people some space to not talk about it, to process, like not to be engaging and talking about it. Because sometimes you think you can solve all your problems by talking. And I think you can solve a lot of problems, but sometimes you need to think about things and reflect and let things sort of marinate and in your mind, and sort of things change. And then you see the person again after 3 weeks and they've thought about it. And then everybody's ready to speak again.
We have a program at the Pregnancy Care Center called Lifeboat, sort of like Parenting 101.
Okay.
But it's broken down
That should
into
be taught
segments.
in grade 9 maybe.
You start off with, how are you, what are you now? How's life is going to change? How do you spend your time now?
Sure.
How do you spend your money now? How do you do these things?
Yes.
And, who's going to do this? What are the realities of parenting? who are you going to have take care of the baby? Are you planning, what are your career plans, And very much like Carolina said, and I have been so delighted that over the course of a pregnancy, that's a beautiful time. It's sort of like a goal. You've got 9 months, or in some cases 4 months, but that's a good chunk of time to be very intentional about, okay, there's going to be a life change happening, and we're going to have big changes take place. So we've had people make significant changes in their lives, like their eating habits, their exercise, their budget. I mean, they used to go out all the time, and spend a lot of money, and they would acknowledge it as wasting. But now they've got a goal. They've got this little person that's coming in. They've made that choice to be the best possible parent, and they're going to prove that they're going to do it well. And it is so much fun to come alongside and just, give a little bit of guidance, but really just watch them flourish. It's fun.
So there's nothing like a good deadline to sharpen minds, and there's no deadline like a pregnancy.
Yeah, right?
It's coming.
There's no such thing.
No.
Like, there's nothing more impending or coming for sure than a baby.
Yeah.
How did your teen pregnancy shape the person you are today?
I think it shaped me in so many ways. I mean, I can't see myself any other way. Like, this is just who I am. It's who I've been now for, my adult life. I think it made me stronger. It made me more driven. It made me, I think maybe I was always going to be somebody who was very passionate, that felt very passionately about certain things. But it made me more focused, maybe, in certain areas.
I understand you're a teacher. So you went to university, obviously, got your teaching degree. And when did you start teaching?
Probably when my son was already in grade 5. So I've been teaching now for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what grade do you teach?
I've taught all the grades K to 5. Currently,
Okay.
I'm teaching kindergarten.
Okay.
I think I've found the one. I love kindergarten. They're so sweet.
What would you say to a teenager who feels that, who's pregnant and hasn't told anybody yet, or maybe she's in that place of loneliness, which is a theme on this show, and you want to tell her she's not alone? What would Carolina say to her?
I would say she's not alone. I would say that that she should take the opportunity to look for help, to reach out to places like the Pregnancy Care Center. I think there's a lot of safe adults in our life that we often don't think about, that because we feel trapped, we feel alone. And so not to let those voices in her head be louder than the voices that are trying to reach out to help her. She's not alone.
Do you think that the loneliness is sometimes self-inflicted, like because of the shame and the guilt, you kind of create a loneliness for yourself in that situation, or is it a natural position to be in? How does it happen?
I don't know how it happens, but I can tell you, I can describe how it felt.
Okay.
It just felt like I was completely kind of surrounded by darkness. Like I was just totally alone. Like no
That's
one could
what all the
understand
girls say
me.
on the show. Like it's like, yeah.
Yeah, like absolutely no one would understand
And
me.
that's not true.
I would be judged.
Yes.
They would just be angry at me. And I couldn't see a way out of my situation. I could see absolutely no solution to my problem. And then to realize, to go full circle and realize, actually, no, my parents who were right there beside me were willing to pour themselves out in love and help me out. And there were people in the community, my church community embraced me. Other, friendly neighbors, people around me just kind of rallied around me. But I had to choose at some point to speak out. Or in my case, because of my pregnancy, it kind of spoke out for me. But yeah, I would just say you're not alone. And don't let those voices in your head that tell you that you're the only one, that you're not alone, that there's no solution, don't let them be louder than those still little voices that are around that want to help you out.